Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hope everyone is having a fantastic afternoon. I want you all to check in with me. Check in with me. If you are on your lunch break right now, I want you to check in. Let me know where you tuning in from. Is it your office? Are you at the office location? Are you at home? And let me know your location. I would love to know where you're checking in with me. Some of you may be catching this later on. You may be catching a replay later in the afternoon, later in the evening when you have some downtime. Let me know. I want to hear from you, y'all. I want you to check in. I'm going to be talking about today, is it overcommitment or is it part of the job? What do I mean by that? I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But before I jump into it, I'm going to quickly introduce myself for those of you who are not familiar with who I am. My name is Robin Woods. I am the author of Boss Moms Move Differently, and I am the CEO and founder of Wine and Mastermind. We have a personal development agency where we help women in leadership redefine success, reprioritize their well-being, and reinvent their lives. And so, y'all, it's been a minute. I am so excited to just share the topic that I'm going to be talking about tonight. And some of this has come from just having conversations with clients, as well as just things that I've experienced personally. So I am super excited to just share some of my knowledge and insights and ways that I've helped some of my clients, and even during my workshops, ways that I've helped other women to be able to navigate in this particular space. So let's go ahead and jump into it because I want to be respectful of your time. I know that I'm probably, some of you may be on your lunch right now, and so I want to make sure that you maximize this time. So the topic for today, we're going to be talking about, is it overcommitment or is it just a part of your job? I'm going to be teaching you 4 strategies to help women in leadership know when to draw the line and regain harmony between their work and family life. What do I mean when I talk about when to draw the line? It means when to set a boundary. That's all it simply means. When are we going to begin setting boundaries? Because oftentimes, what I've learned along the way in my career, I would say 15-year career as an HR professional, as well as just running my own business, one of the things that oftentimes we can get confused in terms of whether or not we are overcommitting, or maybe it's just the nature of the work that you're doing. And I will say that in both scenarios, there are things that you can do about it. You don't have to stay stuck. You don't have to be in a place where you're feeling overwhelmed, overworked. I don't like to use the clinical terms such as like burnout and things of that nature, but I've had clients and other professionals share their experiences just dealing with burnout and things of that nature. But really what it means is identifying whether or not this is overcommitment that we often sign up for. Are we just overcommitting for things, or is it just the nature of the job? So why is this important? I'll give a quick story, and this is more so from a client story. I had worked with her about a year ago, and one of the things, I'm not going to share a name, but one of the things that she was dealing with, she was working she was working at a company for 5 years. She had been in her career for years, but she was working at a company for about 5 years. And at the onset, when she began working in this role, there was a lot of change happening in the organization. And so some of those changes, as most of us are familiar with, and especially if you're a woman in leadership, or even if you're just a leader, you often find that when you start going through organizational changes, that comes with a lot of time. It comes with having to reevaluate processes, people, procedures, like all these different things, right? And so oftentimes those responsibilities are going to weigh heavily on the people in leadership. It's just the name of the game, right? And so what she experienced during that time, she knew that when she accepted this role, that it was going to just be a matter of time where she was going to be maybe having to commit to some things that maybe she wouldn't have otherwise. And so she found herself literally diving in. She dived into the work. She loved the work that she did. But what we also noticed was that there were some specific areas in her personal life that were suffering as a result of her really diving into her work, right? And so If any of you have ever experienced this, I want you to let me know in the chat. I know from personal experience, this was one of my pain points, because I can be the type of person where I want to overperform, right? I want to underdeliver and just really go all in. And so she was, in fact, one of those high achieving type of women that many of us may know, where she wanted to dive into her work, but then she was neglecting things about herself. And so it was leaving her feeling stressed out. By the time she's at home, and as you all are probably familiar with, oftentimes when we get home and we're kind of, sometimes you have to take that mask off, right? Like you're not on all day. And so you tend to be a little bit more frustrated, not as patient with those around you. You may, what some people say, you may find yourself snapping on people, snapping about little small things, right? And so she found herself going through these stages where it was impacting not only her relationship with her spouse, but it was also impacting her relationship with her children. And I can speak to that again from personal experience, because I have been in roles, I have been in positions where I've allowed myself to basically overcommit and, overperform in certain areas of my career. And that just led me to having some mental health challenges, some physical health challenges. Oftentimes I've heard people, even clients, talk about like chronic conditions that are like unexplained chronic conditions that they may face, right? Having these headaches or, stomach situations or abdominal, pains and things of that nature that are just unexplainable. And what I believe is that oftentimes that comes from the result of overcommitting. Okay. So let's talk about a few more examples that some of you may find, or you may actually be able to relate to some of these examples that I'm going to talk about, in terms of where maybe the overcommitting may have shown up on your job. So some examples may include, and I want you to put a 1 in the chat. If you can relate to some of these scenarios that I'm going to talk about, put a 1 in the chat. Let me know that you're with me right now. So some people may find themselves with project overload. Maybe you're taking on just too many projects simultaneously. Maybe that's what you're doing. Some of you may find yourself taking on too many tasks and not delegating. Maybe you just have a really hard time with delegating. I know I have some members in my community where they may be new in their particular role, and sometimes it's hard for them to delegate, right? Because you want to establish a level of trust. And so instead of you delegating certain things, maybe you are trying to keep things close because you feel like maybe things won't really be executed as well. Or maybe you just don't really have an experienced staff as what you would like. And maybe it's going to take time to develop them. Some of you may find overcommitment in the form of just working extended hours. Put it in the chat. I want you to put it in the chat if you can relate to what I'm talking about here. Some of you may have experienced just volunteering for additional responsibilities. Maybe those are things such as maybe mentorships or networking. Maybe you find yourself always on. And I say always on, meaning you never really have any downtime. You never experience that downtime of just having those moments, maybe just with your family or to yourself. Some of you may be neglecting personal development because of the fact that you overcommit in your work and you are taking on those tasks in your job and leading your teams and developing your teams. Maybe you're finding that you're neglecting your own personal development, right? Boundary blurring. And this is something that I always talk about, boundary blurring. I actually call it in my book, Boss Must Move Differently. I talk about boundary blockers. But this is basically overcommitment between work and home life. And oftentimes it's women in leadership roles. I find women specifically in leadership roles where they find it very challenging to switch off from work demands, even during personal time. So we feel like we always on. There are no boundaries in terms of how much work you're consuming, how much work you're doing. You tend to often take that work home, and maybe you have time to just eat dinner with your family, or maybe you don't necessarily have anybody at home, but maybe there's no boundary in terms of the amount of work that you find yourself doing throughout the week and throughout the day. Limited family time. Maybe you struggle to allocate sufficient time to your families. And what's happening is that it's impacting your relationships and your overall well-being of your family unit. So in the example that I gave regarding the client that I was working with previously, that was pretty much a huge pain point for her, was just more so her limited family time. She felt like she wasn't really showing up and being present with her family because she was always on for work, and she was overcommitting and always signing up for things, right? In terms of her job. Some of you may be facing health neglect. Sometimes overcommitment can come in the form of just health neglect. I just know there's got to be someone out there who can probably relate to this, where you find yourself not taking lunch breaks. You don't take your lunch. You find yourself sitting at your desk. You may get in early, and before you know it, you look up and you see the clock, and you realize that you've been on calls back to back and have not taken any time for lunch, any time for breaks, any time for just quiet time. And what you're finding is that it's starting to affect you. Maybe, and I will say from personal experience, what I used to do in one of my roles where I just really did not have a handle on overcommitment, one of the things that I would do, I would always order out. I would always get food like through Uber Eats and have it ordered in. And while it was convenient to do that, it was also forcing me to just stay in my space, in my office space, which was causing other issues that I was facing, other physical issues, other mental health issues that I was facing at the time. The last scenario would be social isolation. Maybe you are just so consumed in your work, so consumed in the things that you're doing, that you're having a challenge with engaging in social activities outside of work due to your time constraints. You just don't have time. You don't have any friend time. You don't have any girl time. Again, when it comes to your family, maybe it's very limited on that because you are so consumed with the things that you have at hand, right? I want you to put a 1 in the chat if any of you can relate to those things. And I know I'm not the only one. I could probably check off every single point here, every single scenario. I could probably check it off because I have been there. I've done that. And I still, the reality is there are times where I still end up facing these challenges, right? Nobody is going to be to a point where you're 100% free from those things where it requires overcommitment, right? You're never going to necessarily be 100% free from those things. Here's the other thing I want to point out. A lot of these things that I've listed, a lot of these scenarios that I've shared, sometimes what you're going to find is that this is just part of the job. So while for some people, it may look like overcommitment, right? In other seasons, based on the season that you're in, other jobs, your industry, sometimes these things that I listed out, it just may be a part of your job. It just may be the nature of what you do. And so that's what I want us to talk about. And I also, before I even jump into those points, into my 4 strategies, one thing I will also say is that sometimes, especially as a leader, when you're leading teams, when you're leading organizations, let's just face it, there are going to be seasons where you may not have, as much of a social life as you would like. There may be seasons where that happens. Sometimes there are going to be seasons where maybe you are working extended hours, right? Because maybe there's a project, maybe you're letting out you're letting out fires, right? In terms of your organization, in terms of your teams. Maybe from a personal development standpoint, maybe you're in that season where it is time for you to really develop your team. Maybe you need to pour more into your team and serve the people on your team to help them develop, because when your team is stronger and when your team develops, then you become a better team and you become a better leader, right? Sometimes we have those seasons. So this is the reason why I think it's important that we really break down the difference between, is this truly overcommitment versus is this just a part of that role? Is this just a part of that season that you're in as it relates to you leading that team? Okay, so let's talk about 4 strategies. I want to talk about 4 strategies that you can use to learn when to draw the line in the sand, and when to regain harmony between your work and your family life. Because what I don't want you guys out here doing, what I don't want you ladies out here doing, is overextending yourself on an ongoing basis, because that is room for disaster. That is basically you setting yourself up to experience some of these physical challenges, some of these mental health challenges, some of these things that in terms of how we show up on our teams. Even the client that I talked about earlier, one of the things that we were hitting on was just her ability to be able to make concise decisions. Sometimes when you are overcommitted and you have too much on your plate, it could hinder you from being able to make sound decisions and to be able to make good judgment, right? Because you are overwhelmed. You have all these things on your plate. You're trying to do all these things, be everything to everybody, and you're not being productive to anyone, right? You're not helping yourself and you're not helping those on your team. You're not helping those people who are in your family, right? So let's talk about those 4 ways that we can help to overcome overcommitment. The first thing is to determine whether or not it's overcommitment or if it's just part of the job. Okay, so we just talked about that a little bit. Here's the thing: overcommitment, in my opinion, is more of a personal thing. You just have to know yourself and you have to be honest with yourself, right? So it really means a personal evaluation. You're going to take a personal evaluation of what overcommitment is to you. So, for example, what may be overcommitment to me in terms of working extended hours, right? That may be my definition of overcommitment. While I may have a friend, for example, she doesn't mind working extended hours of time, right? In terms of her business, in terms of her work, she doesn't mind doing that. And so, in her opinion, that's not necessarily overcommitment, right? But for me, I consider that as overcommitment, right? So for some people, it doesn't really bother them, right? It doesn't bother them to be able to work those hours. For some people, in terms of what I talked about, the scenario in terms of maybe you're not taking your lunch. Some people there are completely fine with that. I've worked with hundreds, and I'm saying hundreds, as an HR professional, as a business leader, as a business consultant. I have worked with hundreds of leaders where some people, they are completely fine with not taking a lunch throughout the day. They're okay with taking their calls back to back, right? And it doesn't bother them. While I've also worked with hundreds of other leaders and other employees and other people who it's a detriment to their bodies over a period of time. So the key is, how do we determine if it's overcommitment or not? The key is, if it's something that's happening where it's straining, right? It's straining you. It's a true pain point, something I would identify as a pain point that you're experiencing, and you have experienced this pain point for an extended period of time. All right. I can't define what extended period of time looks like. Now, I would say, in my definition, I would say at least if it's more than 90 days, 6 months, where you are being strained in a particular area of your life. So, for example, if I am not taking lunch breaks over a period of time for, let's say, 90 days, that may not necessarily be a detriment to my body in the short term, right? But if this is something that I have just adopted this particular habit, and I continue to just not take my lunch breaks and not eat right and always order in all the junk food, all that stuff over a period of time for years, now that's affecting my body. To me, in that particular space, that's where there's some overcommitment. That's where it's strained. That's where it's a strain on me over a period of time. And so maybe that's the area in my life that maybe I need to take a step back and say, hold on, I got to do something different here. I can't keep going like this, because if I'm doing this over the next 60 days or 90 days, right? What is this going to look like if I continue on doing this for the next 3, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? How is that going to affect my body? How is that going to affect my mental health if I continue on down this path? And so this is why I say this is all a case-by-case, person-by-person scenario. So you have to be honest with yourself in terms of thinking through those things. In terms of extended hours, if you are in a relationship, and I'll share my a personal story. This was years ago. I was working in a particular role, and I was working extended hours. And I was very early on in my marriage. And I had a hard time with communicating. I just, in my mind, because I was always just an overperformer, I was just accustomed to overperforming. And so when I got married, ladies, you already know, that was not working for my spouse at home, right? He was not feeling the fact that I was just out traveling on the road, doing all these things over a period of time. Now, he was okay with me doing it here and there, right? But when I got to a place where it was like, okay, I'm on the road all the time, my husband and I we had to take a step back, right? So I realized that I had to do something different in that particular area, because now it was causing a strain in my marriage. right? And so that's what I mean, determining whether or not it's overcommitment. That's where you can determine if it's overcommitment, if it's truly something where it's causing a strain in that particular area and it's happening over a specific period of time, right? Now, the other part is it part of your job? You're going to determine, is this a part of your job? Well, maybe it is. And let's just face it, some of you may be working in roles, you may be in certain careers, certain industries where maybe extended hours is just a part of the job. That's just a requirement. That's what you signed up for, right? You went to school, you got your degrees. You just know that's just the nature of what you do. And you already accept that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's just a part of the job. But I think it's honest that I think it's helpful that we're honest with where we are. Is it overcommitment? Basically, meaning I'm making the decision to commit to certain aspects of my job or certain aspects of my family life, my personal and my professional life. I'm making decisions to add on additional things outside of what is priority, right? Versus this is my job, and in terms of the culture of my job, in terms of the workplace, in terms of the dynamic of my career, this is just what it is. Okay. So make the determination, overcommitment, or is it a part of the job? Once you've made that determination, the next thing I want you to do, I'm going to scroll through. Sorry. The next thing I want you to do is determine if there's alignment with your values. So now you have, and this is what I mean. So I have a shifts framework. If any of you follow me, you probably are already familiar with this. I talk about this in my workshops. And one of the pillars out of my framework is shifts. It basically stands for standards, habits, identity, future, time, and support. The S is the first pillar that I talk about. And that basically means identifying your standards. What is important to you? Why is it important to you? Right? It's very important that we get clear about those things. So what do I mean by that? We got to determine our values, because the values are those things that is basically like the compass for your life. This is where you make decisions based on what you value. So if you value your time with your family, if you value your time with your spouse, if you value your time just to have to yourself, right? You know that when you are making decisions in your work, in your job, when it's time to take on additional projects, when it's time to, volunteer to facilitate maybe some type of volunteer effort that you're doing for your organization, or maybe to join a board, right? Some of us, especially when you're in leadership, you want to join boards, or maybe you want to position yourself in your particular role in a different way. And maybe that may mean you going outside of the parameters of your job and doing a little bit more. You got to ask yourself the question, does it align with your values? Right? If it doesn't align with your values, again, there may be some shifting, there may be some pivoting that you may need to make to ensure that what you're doing truly aligns with those values. Okay. So once we've identified what those values are, and we're true to those values, we've written those down. And I work with my clients in terms of helping them to identify what those are. You're very crystal clear by the time you leave my workshop. The next thing we want you to do is to simply delegate, automate, or communicate. Okay. My husband, I was talking to him about this earlier, and I was sharing with him about the delegate, automate, and communicate. He was like, "Oh, you got your DAC." He was like, "It's the DAC framework." And it's so funny because if you know me, you know that I'm notorious for coming up with a framework, y'all. I love frameworks. So this DAC framework basically means, and it's really an acronym, right? But it means delegate, automate, and communicate. Once you've gotten to a place where you've determined, okay, this is just a part of the job, for example, right? Now let's determine what do I value? What are these things? And do my values really align with the things that I'm doing on my job? Is there alignment there, right? We want to make sure that's the case. But now I know this is a part of the job. I know it's a part of the job for me to maybe work long hours, or maybe I know that it's a part of the job for me to maybe volunteer a few more hours of my time throughout the week or throughout the month to be able to do X, Y, Z. Now there's something that we can still do about it, right? Let's find a way to delegate, meaning you get it off your plate. You have people on your team that you can delegate to, maybe at home, identifying what are those tasks, what are those things that you can hand off to other people, and you're not trying to just take full control over those things, right? How can you delegate? Automate. When I talk about automate, there are so many ways that you can automate in your work. Number one, there are so many ways you can automate. There are also things you can automate at home, such as simply as setting up a grocery pickup order on a weekly basis, right? Meal prep. There's so many apps, so many types of services that you can use for that to be able to ensure that maybe you're just automating this, right? So that you don't necessarily have to think about groceries throughout the week. That's one less thing that you're taking off your plate, right? Maybe you're hiring in a nanny or someone to come in and help you with laundry or household chores or whatever the case is, right? Anything you can do to take it off your plate and you can delegate or automate is going to be key, right? The last part of that is to communicate, asking for help, but also letting those people know in your family, such as your spouse, such as your children, right? Hey, over the next 6 months, over the next 3 months, and I'll give my personal example. When I wrote my book, Boss Moms Move Differently, that's exactly what I did. I knew that this was going to be a commitment. I knew that I had to really buckle down and get this book done. I was determined that I was going to get this book done in 3 months. I actually got the book written and published in 4 months. But it was all because I made the decision to do exactly what I'm sharing here: delegate, automate, and communicate. I delegated things to people around me and my family, even personal life, professional life. I automated some things, and then I simply communicated. I let my family know, hey guys, over the next 3 months, mom is going to be MIA on the weekends, right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to dedicate at least 2 hours in the morning on Saturday to be able to work on this book. But I promise you, after these 2 hours, you got me all day, right? We're going to do some things together. We're going to have some fun together, and being very clear and even ongoing throughout that time frame. So not just communicating at once, right? But taking time to over communicate. And I think that goes a long way because now they understand where you are, what you're doing, right? And oftentimes what I used to do was I would just include my family in on the process at times as well, just so they knew that I was truly committed to the things that I was doing. And so for some of you, especially working in leadership, let me share with you how it translates into your work. So you're leading teams, right? What I believe is that when it comes to prioritizing yourself, it should be demonstrated from the leader, right? Because when you demonstrate that you are prioritizing your well-being and you're prioritizing yourself, what happens is your team will follow. If you're just telling your team members on your team, hey, I want you to take care of yourself. Your well-being is important, right? We've heard that, right? Well-being has been a hot topic, especially since the pandemic, especially since COVID hit, right? But you hear people talk about that. But if you're not demonstrating what that looks like, people are not going to believe you. And so what do I mean by that? And I want you all, if you have any examples of some ways that you've done this, I'm going to share some examples. But if you have some examples of ways that you have shown your teams or you've shown your family ways that you have prioritized your well-being, I want you to put in a chat. Okay. Let me know. Check in with me. Okay. I want to make sure you guys are still there. All right. So for example, I know a boss. He's a member of a leadership team that I currently work for, and I just adore him for this. He's really big about telling the team members, hey, I want you to take your 30-minute break, right? I want you to take your hour break. And he tells us, when I'm on, he's like, I'm on my computer. But when I'm off, I'm off. Don't bother me. Don't message me, right? Like, unless it's an emergency. And he defines what emergency really looks like in terms of reaching out to him. And I can't do nothing but respect that because of the fact that he's very intentional about protecting his time. And so he encourages everybody else. He supports that as a leader. And so I say that because us as leaders, we have to do a better job of demonstrating what that looks like. So that may mean let your team know, hey, for 30 minutes, I'm going to step away and do a quick workout, especially if you're working from home, right? Or even if you're working in the office, hey, y'all, I'm taking an hour. I'm going to take a step away and take a walk and have some time to myself, right? I'm going to do some meditation, whatever that looks like for you. But I think it's important that we really communicate that to the people around us so that they know what those boundaries are. And the thing that I love about my shifts framework is where I talked about the standards, right? Understanding and identifying your standards. when you know what you value and you know what your standards are, it is so much easier for you to articulate what those boundaries are. Because now you know where the line is drawn. You know where to tell people, hey, I don't accept phone calls. I'm not taking phone, and I'm not gonna say I'm not accepting, right? It's a way to say it. But I would say, just to say, hey, when it comes to the weekends, this is the only time I want anyone calling me during the weekend. This is the only time where I want you even working on the weekends, right? It's not gonna be something that's gonna be a typical habit, a typical thing that we do in our jobs, right? So again, delegate, automate, and communicate is going to be the third strategy that I'm sharing with you. The last strategy that I want to share is to determine when it's time to pivot. Okay. So let's say you've gone through the first three strategies. You've gone through those first three strategies and you're like, this particular area in my life is just not improving, right? So I would say look at it personally and professionally. You've already identified in the first step, I have a pain point. I have a particular area in my life where things are just not moving, right? My health is not improving. Maybe I'm not sleeping the way that I need to sleep because I have too much on my mind, or because I find myself on a computer all hours of the night and now I'm overly stimulated by this device, right? Like it's not working. I tried all these things in terms of delegating, in terms of automating, in terms of communicating with my family, but for whatever reason, there's still a gap. There's still something missing here. That may be an indication that maybe it's time for you to pivot. Maybe it's time for you to move differently. I always talk about moving differently from a boss moms move differently standpoint, right? But this is really for women. And we got to get clear about those things. We got to get clear about where we have done everything we could to draw the line in the sand, to set those boundaries in place. And for whatever reason, it's just not moving. Now that may mean, hey, maybe it's time for you to transition in your role. Maybe it's time for you to have a more in-depth conversation, maybe with your boss, or maybe, and I would even say, previously when I talked about communicate, that is going to be a time for you to have a conversation with your boss, right? But I would say for the fourth strategy, when it comes to pivoting, you got to be crystal clear about, hey, this is just not working for me. Because the reality is, whether or not you're overcommitting, or even if it's just a part of the job, you still have a choice in all of it, right? If it's overcommitting, it's straining you, you still have a choice to say, hey, I can take some of these things off of my plate, or none of this is working for me. I don't like anything that I'm doing, right? I don't like how it's affecting my life. I don't like how it's affecting my body. You have a choice there. You also have a choice if you're in that job, right? If you're in that job and that's just the nature of the job, or that's just the nature of the industry or the career, whatever the case is, you still have a choice to move differently and to do something. You can make decisions that will help you to be able to protect your well-being, that will help you to prioritize your well-being and those things that you value. Okay. So those are the four strategies that I wanted to share with you to help you regain harmony between your professional life and your personal life, right? I've also shared with you ways that you can determine, how do you assess whether or not you're overcommitting, maybe you're just doing too much, or if this is just truly a part of the job. Now, I want you all to share with me, what are some things maybe that you have observed, maybe in your work, maybe at what point have you identified that maybe you just started, you're just overcommitting. I want you to let me know. I want you to put in the chat. Feel free to also reach out to me directly. I would love to hear any feedback that you have in terms of this conversation. I would love to hear from you. And also, I am going to be hosting a leadership roundtable on December 8th. And so it's going to be at noon here on my LinkedIn page. And I want you to join us. I'm going to have about 5 women in leadership who are going to be talking about ways that they have been able to prioritize their well-being while also leading teams, right? And so I want you to be a part of that discussion, okay? If you're interested, I want you to send me a DM and I will send you more details about it. But I also just want you to put it on your calendar and join us on December 8th at noon. We will be here for lunch again. Ladies, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that you will join me on December 8th. And I'll probably jump in here another day to talk more about a few more things that I have kind of cooking. But I would love to hear from you in terms of what you felt or what you learned from today's discussion. Thank you. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.